All right, so get this. We're diving into a topic you guys picked out, Western interest in Buddhism. Well, more specifically, Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, just glancing through all this research, it's a lot more than just like incense and meditation retreats.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a really deep rabbit hole, this one. And it goes way back.
Oh, really?
I mean, yeah, the West's whole fascination with Eastern religions, it's a whole thing.
Hey!
And full of twists and turns and, frankly,
yeah,
a lot of misinterpretations along the way.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, one thing I noticed, going through the research is that, like, Tibetan Buddhists were, like, considered, like, Satan worshippers?
Right.
You'd think they were, like, dealing with some, like, supernatural, like, horror movie villains.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, like, in the 18th and 19th centuries, like, that wasn't an uncommon view at all.
Wow.
Like, Europe was having a serious moment of, like, we're the best, everyone else is, like, behind, So, Tibetan Buddhism, I mean, it's got all these rituals, the lamas. I mean, it must just seemed so out there.
Exactly. It totally challenged their worldview. So instead of, like, trying to understand it on its own terms, they just, like, slapped on these labels, backward.
Right.
Or even demonic.
Right.
Talk about judging a book by its cover.
Totally.
More like refusing to even open it, really.
And then it's so funny because then it seems like things take this wild swing in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it's all about romanticizing the East.
Yeah.
And I noticed, like, in your notes, you've got Diderot, Rousseau. I mean, these are big thinkers.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait a minute, most of these guys, they never even went to Asia.
Nope, not even a weekend trip.
Wow.
So this is where, like, that term Orientalism comes in handy.
Okay.
It's basically like this very Western thing, this tendency to, like, create this super idealized, almost fantasy version of Eastern cultures.
Right.
Like, they were projecting their own desires onto something they barely knew.
So Tibet, I mean, with it being all isolated and mysterious, it just became, like, the poster child for this.
Oh, 100%. It was like, this hidden land.
Yeah.
Ancient wisdom, mystical secrets.
Yeah.
At least in their minds, right?
Right.
I mean, it was so far off from reality.
Right.
But that didn't seem to matter.
It's like they invented their own version of Tibet.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's amazing, like, how much power these narratives have,
Right.
Especially when it becomes to things we find mysterious or different.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of narratives, let's talk about theosophists for a second.
Okay.
Because they were all about finding universal wisdom in Eastern religions, especially Tibetan Buddhism. So were they legit? Like, how much truth was there, like, their understanding of it?
We have to give them some credit because they definitely helped make Buddhism more well-known in the West, for sure. They got people talking about it.
Yeah.
But were they always accurate? I don't know about that.
Okay.
It was more like they were, like, cherry-picking ideas to fit their own beliefs.
So less about authentic Tibetan Buddhism and more about, here's what we already believe, and look, it's in this ancient tradition.
Exactly. And, sadly, that kind of selective interpretation, it just led to even more misconceptions about Tibet and its traditions.
Okay, so you've got to tell me about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I mean, that book is everywhere, right? It just screams mystical wisdom.
For sure. And it's been incredibly influential. But, and you probably saw this in the research, there's a catch.
Okay.
It's not exactly a straightforward translation.
Yeah.
Like, it's been heavily interpreted through a very specific lens, a Western lens. So, again, it kind of feeds into this idea of Tibet as this mystical utopia.
Which, come on, read that.
Not quite the whole picture.
No. Not even close.
But it gets even wilder.
Wilder. Okay, you gotta tell me more.
Okay, so there's this guy, Lobsang Rampa.
Uh-huh.
His book, The Third Eye, massive hit, right?
Oh, yeah.
Claimed to be Tibetan. Wrote about all these mystical experiences.
Yeah.
The whole 9 yards.
Totally. Everyone and their brother was talking about the third eye.
Well, get this, Rampa.
Yeah.
Total fraud.
Wait, he wasn't even Tibetan.
Nope, he was a British guy. Just making stuff up.
You're kidding.
And the kicker is, even after people found out, his books, they kept selling like crazy.
Wow.
So it shows you how hungry the West was for these exotic tales, even if they were totally made up.
So people were buying into this fantasy even when they knew it wasn't real.
It's kind of wild, right?
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to this, like, deeper desire.
Yeah.
This yearning for, something beyond just the everyday, the ordinary.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people in the West, Tibetan Buddhism, or at least the idea of it, it seemed to offer that, like that escape hatch.
Which brings us to that whole new forms of believing thing
Sure.
that was in the research you sent.
Yeah.
We're not talking about rosary beads and Sunday service here.
No, not at all. It's a totally different ballgame now.
Yeah.
It's a lot less about like organized religion these days.
Right.
It's more about, picking and choosing spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Like almost like it's a self-help aisle or something.
Yeah, like a create your own spirituality kit.
Exactly. And Buddhism, with its emphasis on things like mindfulness,
Right.
meditation,
Yeah.
it just fits right into that.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's become like a tool
Right.
to help people like manage stress,
Yeah.
find a little bit of peace, in this crazy world.
But isn't that kind of like missing the bigger picture?
Yeah.
Because Buddhism is a religion, right?
Absolutely.
With like centuries of like philosophy and tradition behind it.
For sure. And that's where, things get even more interesting, I think. You see a lot of these core Buddhist teachings,
Yeah.
like the idea of like rejecting the self,
Right.
they kind of clash with this very Western, very individualistic approach.
Right. Yeah, it's like we're drawn to this like idea of something authentic, something
Right.
different from like Western traditions, but then
Right.
we just like turn around and try to make it fit our own desires.
Yes, exactly.
That's so ironic.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, can we ever really like approach another culture's beliefs
Yeah.
without like projecting our own baggage onto them?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a tough question. And honestly,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an easy answer.
Yeah. It's complex. It really makes, the Dalai Lama's popularity even more fascinating because, you got this figure who like really embodies like Tibetan Buddhism.
He does.
But then his message is all about, peace and compassion. And it seems to really resonate across cultures.
Yeah, no, you're right. He is a fascinating figure, isn't he?
Yeah.
And his teachings, they do seem to tap into something much more like universal.
Yeah.
Something that kind of speaks to people, like no matter their background.
Yeah. There's always a but.
Even the Dalai Lama himself.
Yeah.
He's very aware of his audience.
Yeah.
He's said as much himself.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He chooses his words carefully.
Wow.
He frames his message in a way that's like accessible to a global audience.
It's not about like changing the core message, but it's about finding like the right language,
Exactly.
the right approach to make it, relatable.
Precisely. And honestly, that's a skill in itself,
Yeah.
to like bridge that gap between cultures,
Yeah.
between different ways of seeing the world,
Totally.
It's not easy.
Right.
It makes you think how much of what we like embrace about Buddhism is actually like genuine understanding,
Yeah.
and how much is really just about us finding something that like validates
Right.
what we already believe.
It's like we're looking in a mirror, but the mirror is also reflecting back this like version of ourselves that we want to see.
Right.
It's complicated. And we started this whole deep dive thinking it was just going to be about like Westerners discovering Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
But it's so much more than that.
It really is. It's about curiosity.
Yeah.
But it's also about like cultural critique.
Right.
It's about longing.
Yeah.
It's about, trying to escape our own like preconceived notions,
Yeah.
and then sometimes falling right back into them
Yeah.
without even realizing it.
Feels like we've been like trying to solve this cultural riddle,
Yeah.
And the answer just keeps like changing right in front of us.
Exactly. Remember at the beginning, like those early Westerners,
Yeah.
they were practically terrified of Tibetan Buddhism.
I know.
Remember those Satan comparisons?
Oh, how could I forget that? It's like they thought they were dealing with like a spiritual boogeyman.
Right. And now look,
Right.
it's all mindfulness apps, meditation retreats.
Right.
Like Buddhism is practically mainstream these days.
Yeah, it's like almost become a product, hasn't it?
Totally.
Like packaged and sold as like a quick fix for the soul.
Yeah.
And, it makes you wonder, like,
Yeah.
what would those early skeptics,
Yeah.
what would they think about all this?
I know, right? They'd be doing a double take if they walked into a like tech startup.
Oh, I know.
You saw a meditation room.
Right. Like, whoa, hold on a second.
Seriously.
But speaking of double takes, isn't it kind of ironic?
What's that?
Like how we view Tibetan Buddhism?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We're like drawn to this idea of it being so authentic,
Right.
so different from our traditions.
Yeah.
But then we like turn around and try to make it fit into these Western ideals, like
Exactly.
individualism,
Yeah.
self-improvement.
It's like we're like
It's weird.
attracted to how different it is.
Yeah.
But then we immediately try to make it more familiar.
Totally. It's like we're stuck in this loop of like
Totally.
seeking and reshaping.
Yes. Which begs the question,
Yeah.
can we ever really appreciate Tibetan Buddhism like on its own terms?
Right.
Or are we like destined
Right.
to see it through this like Western lens?
I know, it's like the $1 million question, right?
It really is.
And I don't know if there is like a simple answer,
Right.
but maybe that's okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's not about finding like the perfect answer.
Right, exactly. Maybe it's more about like using this whole exploration as a way to like understand ourselves a little better.
I think that's a really great point.
Yeah.
Because really, it's less about becoming like experts in Tibetan Buddhism, right?
Totally.
It's more about what this whole journey,
Yeah.
what it reveals about us, our desires,
Sure.
our preconceptions, even at our own, search for meaning.
Absolutely, yeah. We came into this deep dive
Yeah,
thinking we were gonna like uncover this big truth
right.
about, Western interest in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
And it turns out the truth is like
It's kind
messy and complicated.
of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And always changing.
Always evolving.
Just like us.
Exactly.
Well, on that note,
Right.
this has been super interesting.
Really fascinating
Yeah.
to kind of go on this journey together.
Yeah, and you know what? I really feel like this deep dive
Yeah.
wasn't just about, Tibetan Buddhism. It was about like us
Yeah.
and our relationship with like the unknown, and our never-ending quest to like
Never-ending quest.
understand ourselves
Yeah.
and the world around us.
Around the world around us. That's right.
And hey, there's always more to learn,
Always more to learn.
more to question.
Exactly.
And I think that's the beauty of it all.
I completely agree.